I've been working on small engines for quite some time now, and even though I've been pretty lucky in getting them working again, once in a while I have a real head scratcher, and one of those would be this Toro mower. I'm not really sure what's going on with it, but after the last video on it, I got a lot of great advice as to what could be wrong with it. So with all this great advice, hopefully I can get it running again the way it's supposed to, otherwise this might not turn out well for this mower. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Toro lawnmower, and the problem is that in the last video, we found out that it starts but it won't stay running at any single speed and will surge up and down, making it impossible to use. Now in the last video, we did inspect the carb and check it for any clogs or any other issues, but we found nothing wrong with it. Now the idea did come up that it might be something else, so we're going to look at some of the other ideas instead. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be a little different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. So something new that just happened that wasn't in the last video is that the brake cable is now broken. It's really strange because it never showed any signs that it had any issues before breaking. That means I'll have to order a new one, and hopefully by the end of the video, it'll show up, but in the meantime, I'll have to bypass it so we can do our testing. It's very unfortunate, but I guess this is just what happens when springtime comes around here, but after a quick use of the leaf blower, most of the seeds are now gone. I would like to do something about this paint. As you can see, it's very dull, and that's because the previous owner didn't do a very good job of taking care of it. That's the main reason why you don't see any stickers left on this mower. It also looks like we need to put some oil into the engine as well. I don't recall if I drained all the fluids out since the last video, but it would appear that way. But I guess it's a good thing we checked, otherwise we would have had a surprise about 20 minutes into our first mow with it this season. There's also the matter with this muffler guard. It would seem that at some point the two bolts at the front of it came loose, and now it's just hanging there by the last bolt. Until I find two more bolts to replace the missing ones, I'm just going to remove the last one and then take the entire shield off the engine. That way it's a lot less unsightly. Now, if I had to guess, I'd say this bolt was a quarter 20, but I've never had to deal with these before, so I'm not really sure what they are. While I have it off the engine, I'm also going to bend this piece back into shape and then put it somewhere safe so I can find it again, otherwise it'll end up probably where all my left socks are. So here's the deal, I need to get all the way down to the flywheel on this engine, so I might as well give it the cleaning that I never gave it in the first place. If you didn't know, this mower has been on this channel for more than a handful of times for various reasons, and the owner could never figure out why I was having all these issues. Well, if you hadn't figured it out, their lackluster style of maintaining and even using the mower is the main reason why it keeps showing back up in my videos. Now, it is your mower, and you can leave it outside if you want to, or left under a tree all year long. It's your choice to do so, but please don't act surprised when each and every spring it has some sort of issue that you need to fix before you're able to use it. Now, it's obviously best to keep your mower in the garage, basement area, or even in a shed, just so long as it doesn't get too hot in the summer. But if you can't do that, leave it somewhere outside where it can't get rained on or has direct sunlight on it. The reason why is that if it gets rained on enough, it might start to have a rust issue. Now, there's nothing wrong with washing your mower just so long as it dries off within a few hours, but if it gets wet and stays that way for days, then you might have an issue after a few years. And just like people, getting too much sun can be a bad thing for the plastics on these mowers. They'll start to break down a lot faster if left in direct sunlight. So getting some sun while being used is fine, but getting more than needed might not be a good idea. So one of the ideas that came up as to why this engine is running the way that it is a sheared flywheel key. Now this happens when the blade hits something very hard like a stump or a rock. This will then shear the ignition key, causing the timing of the ignition system to be off from where it's supposed to be. Now after getting to the flywheel, we'll then remove the starter cup and inspect the key for any signs of damage. Someone also mentioned how the thermostat could be the culprit as well, but as you can see, it is in the correct orientation and it's moving the air vane just the way it's supposed to, so fortunately it's not causing our issues. Now, I have seen a poorly placed air vane before, mainly due to someone installing the air vane without taking off the recoil assembly, and when that happens, the vane might end up behind the arm for the thermostat instead of in front of it. While I'm in this location, I'm also going to disconnect the brake cable from its anchor until the new one comes in. In the meantime, I'm going to use a piece of wire to bypass the lever. Now, this is not a good thing to do if you intend on selling the mower. It's best to make sure all the safety devices are there and working like it should. This, of course, is the most basic safety device, but I've seen a few of these on mowers being sold, and I would not recommend doing it. I'm only doing it on this one for testing in the next part. Now, before I take the starter cup off the flywheel, I'm going to use it to help spin the engine over while using my compression tester. Now, the tester will measure how much pressure the engine can make on the compression stroke. Now, I would normally have to tie down the brake cable for this part, but since the cable is broken, that's the reason why I had to bypass it. So the reading is a very good 125 psi or so, depending upon the angle you see the gauge. The reason I'm doing a compression test is because one of the suggestions as to what's wrong with the engine was that it could be worn out. However, as you can see with the reading like this, it's not worn out, but it does have some wear on it, but it's not enough to cause it to behave the way that it is. Next, we'll finally remove the starter cup so we can inspect the flywheel key. Now, I replaced this key several years ago, so this will be the first time seeing it since then. But if you take a closer look, you can see that the key is still lined up in the keyway just like it's supposed to be. So unfortunately, that's not the cause for this engine running the way that it is. That means we need to move on to our next likely suspect, which is the ignition coil. Now, as you can see, it's very rusty. In fact, this might be the culprit, but there's just one issue. Most times, coils simply fail. They won't behave in a way to make the engine run the way like this one is. Now, to test it, I'm going to remove the spark plug and check what the spark looks like at the tip of the plug. So even though the sparks seem to be inconsistent, it's probably because the plug was only making intermittent contact with the metal on the engine. Either way, I'm very satisfied that the coil is not the issue and that more than likely the carb was the issue the entire time. Now, a good portion of the comments mentioned the carb as the issue, even though in the last video we cleaned and inspected it and couldn't find anything wrong with it. In fact, the reason the carb looks as new as it does is because it was replaced only a couple of years ago. There simply wasn't enough time on it to damage it and cause our issues. Of course, I'm not going to throw this away because it still has a few good parts on it that if I had to replace would probably total up to about $10. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but you only need to do that 10 more times for it to be something most people would be considered worth it. Now, the new carb was only $10. It's cheap enough that the money saved from keeping the old one around makes it worth the price. To be quite honest, I probably should have ordered several of these to have them on hand. That way I don't have to wait for one to come in the mail. It's unfortunate that I took this long to realize the issue has always been the carb. I simply didn't want to admit that a 2-year-old carb could have issues already, but I guess we'll find out here soon enough once we get the mower back on the ground. There were a few more great ideas though, and I'll mention them if you think one of them might be the issue you're having with yours. One of the great recommendations was that it was a fuel-related issue, but the issue was either with the screen in the fuel tank or the fuel line itself. Now, if you had an issue with either part, it would reduce the fuel flow to the carb and make it seem like the carb was the issue, but in fact, it was the amount of fuel getting to the carb that was the real issue. Another possible issue was related to the governor. It was either the internal part or possibly just the spring that was the issue. The problem is that if it was internal, it wouldn't cycle the way that it was. The engine would still run at a constant speed, and it's the same if it was the spring. Now, don't get me wrong, all these ideas on what the issue could have been was very helpful because it gets you thinking about what it couldn't be just as much as what it could be, so I'm grateful for all the ideas. Now, this repair did take more than a day to film, and in that time, I did receive the new brake cable, so after getting the mower back on the ground, I'll be able to remove the bypass and install it. I'm also going to replace the missing screws for the cover, which is a whole different story, which we'll cover in a different video. Now, this cable was just a tad bit more expensive than a standard one only because it has a very large mounting block that's meant to act as an anchor for the self-propelled cable. That means we'll need to disconnect the end of the self-propelled cable from its handle to make it easier to install. I'm sure you don't have to do this, but I'm going to. Now, when I said it was a tad bit more expensive, in reality, it's only $2 to $3 more than a standard one, which only makes it about $13. If you need one of these, there should be a link for it in the description. Unfortunately, since the block forward acts as an anchor for the self-propelled cable, once you install it, you'll need to adjust the cable for the self-propel so there's not too much tension on the spring, otherwise holding down the self-propel handle can get really tiring. Now, there's nothing wrong with this setup. In fact, the reason it's set up this way is for ease of installation and adjustment. But as time has gone by, manufacturers have started to care less and less about ease of adjustability and instead have made it to where there is no adjustment, and when you need to adjust it, you'll just have to buy a new cable, or better yet, just buy a new lawnmower. Now, to adjust the cable, squeeze the self-propel handle, and if you have to use a lot of power to hold it closed, then you'll need to loosen the nut on the anchor and then slide the cable up towards the handle a bit until it's easy to squeeze, but it still puts tension on the cable. Now, once the engine is on and you can test it out, you might still have to fine-tune it. The last thing we need to do is to put some fresh 100% gasoline in the tank, watch for any fuel leaks from the carb, which is unlikely since the carb is new, and then we'll try starting it and test out the self-propel. Just have the wrench ready just in case you need to adjust the cable again. So it turns out it was the carb that was the issue this entire time. I feel bad because I could have sold this mower last year if I had just replaced the carb and not dragged my feet trying to figure out if it was something else. But at least we got it running the way it's supposed to, and I can sell it either online or at a local garage sale. Either way, this should make someone a great mower. I just wish I could get a couple of Toro stickers for it since it's missing every single one, but I guess I'll have to leave that for a different project on a different day. So the lesson for today was that even if you think the carb might not be the issue, you need to rule it out. And if you have a carb that you can adjust, then try making some adjustments first. And then if that doesn't work out, then replace the carb. Now, if you don't want to buy a cheap carb but don't want to shell out the money for an OEM carb just to find out if it's the issue or not, then I'd recommend getting the cheap carb first. And if that works, then buy the OEM carb and sell the cheap one off. So my question is, if you are 99% sure that the carb is not the issue, but there's still a 1% chance that it could be, would you get a new carb just so you can say, yes, I'm 100% sure the carb is not the issue? Now, after this experience, I would have to say, yes, I'd buy a new carb just to make sure it wasn't. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.